On the open seas of the Indian Ocean, just west of Western Australia, a huge structure stretches out across the water. This is the Reverie, a multi-use deep-water ocean facility. Amidst the huge steel turrets, liquid natural gas storage, and rows of demountable accommodation, a hexagonal building sits at the center of it all. Inside, a casino ballroom. Tuxedoed waiters move silently between tables where high-dressed high rollers toss their chips down on green felt. The chief pit boss, a young woman named Jessie, stands watching the floor, an undrunk martini in one hand. Her eyes pick up everything, every stray move, every attempted swindle, every waiter pocketing a bribe. Then all of a sudden, her eyes catch something unexpected.
On the open seas of the Indian Ocean, just west of Western Australia, a huge structure stretches out across the water. This is the Reverie, a multi-use deepwater ocean facility. Amidst the spinning turbines, enormous batteries, and rows of solar-powered eco-lodges, a hexagonal building sits at the center of it all. Inside, an animal sanctuary. Well-dressed eco-tourists from developed nations move between tanks of rehabilitated wildlife, feeding and tending to turtles and dolphins. The chief tour guide, a young woman named Jessie, stands watching the room, an undrunk kombucha in one hand. Her eyes pick up everything, every raw spot on a stingray's fin, every tourist's smile, every moment of connection between person and animal. Then, all of a sudden, her eyes catch something unexpected.
The lights go out.
The lights go out.
A huge explosion echoes from outside.
A huge explosion echoes from outside.
A dozen men in wetsuits and balaclavas storm the control center, brandishing assault rifles, shouting, "Everyone on the ground!" Jessie addresses the crowd.
Everyone stay calm. There's no need to panic. Just do exactly as they say. Hey everybody, I'm Jordan. I'm a writer and a filmmaker from Wurundjeri land.
And I'm David. I'm a playwright from Ngunnawal country. Thanks so much for coming along today. Welcome to Full Metal Aquatic. This is a show about the future of the oceans and about how imagining the future can help us take action in the here and now. We're not futurists or scientists, we're artists. And we were invited to create this work by researchers from the Future Seas project based at the University of Tasmania and the Centre for Marine Socioecology in Hobart.
The Future Seas project has released a series of 11 peer-reviewed papers outlining the challenges facing the world's oceans and several possible future scenarios. We've created a presentation that explores these scenarios and looks at how we might get from the present day to those possible futures in the year 2030. Now, we believe that the best way to explore a future scenario is through a narrative. And the genre that we've chosen for our narrative today is that of a high-stakes, globe-trotting action thriller.
One reason for that is that the two of us love these kinds of stories, from James Bond to Catherine Bigelow to John le Carré to John McClane. And if you're going to tell a story about the future, why not go big? But the other reason is that these kinds of far-reaching stories are a great way to explore the future of something as big as the ocean. These high-octane thrillers jump from set piece to set piece, and at each location, there's a chance to see how the world has changed through that particular setting.
For example, each globe-trotting action adventure has to start with a reluctant hero being forced out of retirement by some new threat. In our story, this scene takes place in a coastal village, so that we can see the possible scenarios for coastal communities in a decade's time.
Next, our thriller needs to have a set piece where they visit an out-of-the-way location to meet a character who can help them obtain some kind of critical information. In our story, this takes place at an offshore coral reef. Offshore, in ocean terms, means between 12 and 200 nautical miles from the shore. This is the strip of ocean where more and more of the world's marine infrastructure is right now being constructed.
And finally, our story concludes with the heroes infiltrating a high-security facility for a race-against-the-clock showdown. And in our story, this will take place in international waters, more than 200 miles from land, in a facility that we're calling the Reverie.
The Reverie is our imagined version of a massive multi-use deep ocean platform. Platforms like this will become an increasingly important part of the future of our oceans as they turn into major infrastructure sites. Now, these platforms already exist in the form of oil rigs, artificial islands, and deep water refueling stations. They're mostly owned and run by the military and private companies. Even an aircraft carrier is a sort of offshore platform, but in time they will become more and more civilian-facing. The
thing about these platforms is the sheer scale of them. Case in point, the Prelude. The Prelude is a natural gas drilling platform that was built by Shell, the biggest offshore facility ever constructed. 75 meters wide, half a kilometer long, and made with 250,000 tons of steel.
It's been a rolling series of crises for Shell. Since it launched off Western Australia in 2018, it's been out of action more than half the time. In December 2021, it caught fire and the whole structure nearly collapsed.
Nevertheless, the argument for offshore infrastructure is that it's actually relieving the pressure on coastal communities. Already, most ocean construction is taking place far from the coastline in offshore regions.
As the technology improves, this development will eventually move deeper and deeper into international waters. In the past 20 years alone, there's been a 30% expansion of offshore wind energy facilities. These are mostly anchored installations, but now floating platforms in deeper water are becoming more and more common.
Our inspiration for the Reverie is taken from these incredibly utopian artists' renderings by a company called Oceanics, whose slogan is "Leading the next frontier for human habitation." As you can see, they're imagining a world where large segments of the human population live in these sprawling, multi-use man-made islands. And in this image that we're using for the Reverie, you can see cargo ports, wind farms, gas facilities, energy storage, housing, aquaculture farms, and so on and so on.
So now, we're going to tell you this white-knuckle action-adventure caper set in the year 2030, but we're going to be telling it twice in two different future scenarios. In each of these scenarios, the characters are the same, the story is the same, but the world is different. And through those differences, we'll be able to see how our choices between now and 2030 will affect the outcome of the story.
The first version of 2030, we're dubbing business as usual. So in this scenario, there has been lots of talk about ocean conservation, but not much action. Governments are focused on economic growth and are subsidizing potentially unsustainable fishing industries. Wealthy corporations have rushed to build offshore infrastructure because it's away from the land, out of sight, out of mind, and they can get away with more unsustainable practices. Meanwhile, communities are facing the impacts of climate change and declining fisheries, with the effects falling hardest on the most vulnerable. Whenever you see an orange border or an orange background, you'll know that we're in this business as usual future.
The second version of 2030, we've dubbed more sustainable. Just like in the business as usual scenario, climate impacts are starting to hit and ocean ecosystems are declining. In this scenario, though, governments have managed to come up with functioning treaties to help manage ocean resources. Consumer pressure has forced corporations to be more transparent and sustainable. And there's been more collaboration between scientists, communities, and traditional owners in managing ocean ecosystems. Whenever you see a blue border or background, we're in the more sustainable future.
So right now, it's time to meet our reluctant hero and see what the future looks like in each of these scenarios, starting with business as usual.
The sun is setting on a small Tasmanian fishing village. The buildings are run down and weathered, still showing damage from a major storm in the mid-2020s. The waves splash up against the cheap concrete barriers, homemade defenses against increasing storm surges. Seagulls float over the bay, looking for fish through the teeming clouds of jellyfish.
Down by the water's edge, Lara Nguyen is instructing a group of interstate businessmen about local fishing regulations. She says,
"In this village, there are two companies that control the fishing boats. They don't usually worry about tourists fishing on the shore, but you'd be wise to keep your head down if you see company security go past. How did everyone go with their catches?"
The tourists, in their acid-resistant fishermen's trousers, stand at the water's edge and hold up 3 or 4 small fish each.
Well done, everyone. Now let's scan them for microplastic content. I assume that most of these will be unsafe to consume, but you never know. Lara is interrupted by the roaring sound of rotors overhead, a fleet of Black Hawk helicopters approaching the village, a deafening whir of blades and a plume of sand, and the choppers land one by one on the beach. A cabin door slides open, and a pair of black combat boots crunch down on the sand. A woman in a Kevlar vest strides over to Lara, flanked by a team of battle-ready private security mercenaries.
Lara Nguyen, industrial architect and world-famous marine engineer.
Retired. Who are you?
Margarita Lopez, section chief for Seafleur Global Corporate Security. Are you the same Lara Nguyen who designed a Reverie floating natural gas facility in 2022?
That was me. But now I organize angling tours for green entrepreneurs from Sydney. What do you want with me?
We've got a problem with the Reverie.
And now let's pause and take a look at that scene again, this time in the more sustainable future.
The sun is setting on a small Tasmanian fishing village. The buildings are worn but well maintained. There's some visible damage from a major storm back in the mid-2020s, but the community has recovered well, using money from a dedicated federal climate relief fund. The waves splash up against thick trees and sturdy vegetation, planted along the shoreline to help protect against increasing storm surges.
Down by the water's edge, Lara Nguyen is demonstrating some traditional onshore fishing techniques to a group of young apprentices. She says, "Now, the levels of fish that you're allowed to catch are set by the Palawa community in consultation with traditional elders. So this season, we're allowed to catch cod, mullet, and flathead."
The teenagers proudly hold up their fish, big, healthy, striped cod.
Well done, everyone. Now let's scan them for nutrients. Nationally, we're trying to focus more on nutrition security rather than just food security. So it's important to track the quality of every catch.
But Lara is interrupted by the roaring sound of engines along the surf, a fleet of solar-powered dinghies approaching the village. The electric engines chug gently to a halt as the boats pull up to the beach. A pair of practical black hush puppies crunch down on the sand, and a woman in a crisp International Ocean Police uniform strides over to Lara, flanked by a team of volunteer security personnel with one taser to share between them. Lara Nguyen, industrial architect and world-famous marine engineer.
Retired. Who are you?
Margarita Lopez, lead APAC investigator with the International Ocean Police. Are you the same Lara Nguyen who designed the Reverie floating natural gas facility for Sea Fleur Industries in 2022?
That was me. But now I teach sustainable fishing practices to kids from the local community. What do you want?
We've got a problem with the Reverie.
So then, in both futures, Lopez explains the situation to Lara.
We lost contact with the Reverie about 6 hours ago. The whole facility's gone dark. Final communication sounded like a distress signal, something about armed men storming the control center. It's been hijacked.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that, but I haven't set foot on the Reverie in a decade.
No, but you designed it, and now you're going to help us get on board.
The hell I am. The Sydney-based entrepreneurs or the group of bright-eyed local teenagers gasp at Lara's outburst.
And what if I told you that Jessie was there at the time of the hijacking?
Jessie, my protege.
Yes. When you left 8 years ago, you left her in charge. That means she's a high-value asset. And right now, she's in danger. In the business-as-usual future, Lara stares out over the ocean. A handful of streamlined corporate fishing vessels leaving slicks of diesel on the waves as they zigzag in the distance.
I'll do it. But just so we're clear, I don't give a damn about Seafloor Industries or its strong-armed lobbying of world governments to secure monopolies on deep ocean infrastructure and monocultural fish farming. I'm doing this for Jessie. Lead the way. Lara holsters her microplastic scanner and follows Lopez to the fleet of waiting helicopters.
While in the more sustainable future, Lara stares out over the ocean, a handful of family-owned tinnies and solar-powered trawlers zigzagging in the distance.
I'll do it. But just so we're clear, I don't give a damn about the International Ocean Police or the UN symposium held in the late 2020s that drafted a mandate to establish a jointly funded worldwide oceanic law enforcement agency reminiscent of Interpol or the WHO before it. I'm doing this for Jessie. Lead the way. Lara pockets her nutrient scanner and follows Lopez to the fleet of waiting dinghies.
And with that, it's time for a quick interlude. When we speak about the future of the oceans, it's important to acknowledge the context that we're speaking from and the deep history of our relationship to the oceans. David and I are both settlers, and we were raised on and are currently speaking from indigenous land.
Now, according to the United Nations, there are roughly 370 million indigenous and traditional peoples worldwide, making up 5% of the world's population. But this small group is responsible for managing 80% of global biodiversity. First Nations people have sustainably managed marine resources for millennia using traditional practices. It's a belief of many Indigenous peoples that we come from the land, the waterways, and the sea. And so maintaining a healthy country is synonymous with maintaining our own health.
The Future Seas project brought together a number of different Indigenous and First Nations people to contribute their perspective to the research. There were representatives from
the Haida in the Northwest Pacific Ocean off the coast of British Columbia, the Atu people from Greenland, coastal Sami communities in Finland, the Pongsunatao in Taiwan, Maori people from the Bay of Plenty in New Zealand,
Also the Palawa peoples in Lutruwita, Tasmania, the Quandamooka people from Queensland, Sami communities in the Murmansk region of Russia, the Zulu nation in South Africa, and the Kawawana in Senegal.
This is an extremely diverse group with very different practices, but across all these peoples, there is the mindset that humans are within the natural system and are actively part of it, rather than being outside nature and trying to control it. In the present day, Indigenous people are not only exposed to the impacts of climate change, they're limited in what they can do about it because they're forced to work within the constraints of Western colonial systems. In the business as usual future, we can imagine that this dynamic will continue.
A more sustainable future will integrate Indigenous and traditional knowledge, and there are already examples of what this might look like. The island of Markkala in Finland falls within Finnish territory, but is fully autonomous and governed by traditional laws.
In Canada, the Haida Gwaii Marine Plan for managing the coastal area of British Columbia was developed by the Indigenous Haida Nation in collaboration with the Canadian government.
And the Pongsanotau people in Taiwan have built digital archives of their traditional knowledge to help pass down their practices to younger generations.
There are lots of different pathways to a more sustainable future for the oceans, and we'll come back to them in more depth later on. But it's really critical to note that we can't get to a healthy and inclusive future for the oceans without first acknowledging the past. That means acknowledging the damage done to Indigenous peoples and to the oceans by colonization, both historical and ongoing. Looking forward, we then need to empower Indigenous communities to manage their own marine and coastal areas according to their traditional practices. So, time for the second act of our story. Lara and Lopez are on their way north. In the business as usual future, the fleet of seafloor choppers passes over the degraded East Australia coastline, soaring high above eroded seawalls, carbon dioxide removing kelp farms, and Chris Hemsworth's privatized wellness coastal compound.
Good God, Nguyen. It's tragic seeing how storm surges and bushfires have devastated this once lucky country.
In the more sustainable future, the IOP dinghies cruise along the verdant East Australia coastline, passing offshore wind farms, community-owned fisheries, and a network of well-placed marine protected areas.
Good God, Nguyen. You can see how uneroded the shorelines are compared to how much they were projected to lose if we hadn't started on those nature-based solutions back in the 2020s. But anyway, enough sightseeing.
If we're going to sneak aboard the Reverie, we need to make a detour. There's someone we need to speak to. And last I heard, they were working on the Ashmore Reef.
Out of the question. That's practically Indonesia. My mission was to collect you and bring you straight to the Reverie.
Jakob Stones helped design the Reverie security system. He's a genius. I'm telling you, without his help, your precious Reverie is going to end up like Atlantis.
Well, I'll need to check with my superior officer.
Are you capable of doing anything without your boss's clearance?
Look, lady, in my business, initiative is a dirty word. But hell, I'm feeling generous. You've got 1 hour.
In the business as usual future, the fleet of Black Hawks is circling the Ashmore Reef Marine Park, a burgeoning coastal garbage patch. Amidst the dense sludge of microplastic soup floats a high-tech research vessel, weighted down with scientific instruments, teeming with busy crew members. Lopez's chopper sets down on the ship's helipad, and as she and Lara alight on the ship's hull, a lone figure emerges from the bridge, a pale Scandinavian gentleman with geometric wire-frame glasses.
Well, if it isn't Lara Nguyen.
Hello, Jakob. I wish I had time for pleasantries, but we need your help. This is Margarita Lopez from Seafloor Global Corporate Security. The Reverie's been hijacked.
I thought you were done with the Reverie, Lara. I thought you swore never to return.
I did, but they've got Jesse.
Ah, your protege. I see. Well, in the more sustainable future, the fleet of solar-powered dinghies are pushing through the Ashmore Reef Marine Park, an expansive bed of bleached coral. A circling fleet of robotic cleaners strain the plastics out of the ocean and return to dock at an old barge, barely still seaworthy, with a makeshift laboratory and a cobbled-together lean-to sprawling on the deck.
Lopez's boat pulls up alongside the barge, and as she and Lara scrambled on board, a sunburned Scandinavian gentleman with a huge bushy beard and sticky-taped glasses appears from the shack.
Well, if it isn't Lara Nguyen.
Hello, Jakob. I wish I had time for pleasantries, but we need your help. This is Margarita Lopez from the International Ocean Police. The Reverie's been hijacked.
I thought you were done with the Reverie, Lara. I thought you swore never to return.
I did, but they've got Jesse.
Oh, your protege. How awful.
Over in our business as usual future, Jakob offers Lara and Lopez bottled mineral water as he leads them up to the bridge.
I wish I could help you, but I've moved on to bigger and better things since I left the Reverie. This vessel is undertaking oceanic iron fertilization, thanks to sponsorship from Desigual, the jeans manufacturer. We're seeding the Ashmore Reef with thousands of tons of iron sulfate. The iron stimulates phytoplankton productivity and helps sequester carbon from the atmosphere. As we like to say at Desigual, Desigual, turn your blue jeans green.
Cute slogan, Jakob. Is it having any measurable effect?
Well, no, not yet. We're constantly being disrupted by storms. They're far more frequent than they ought to be this time of year.
It's 2030, Jakob. Storms are more frequent at every time of the year. Face it, you're running a carbon offset exercise to greenwash a fast fashion label, and your only real impact is turning whatever's left of this reef into a huge algae bloom. Lopez cuts in.
Hey, we don't have time for this. This area of ocean belongs to Seafleur Industries, and last time I checked, you hadn't paid our security levy. I'm shutting down this operation effective immediately.
Jakob snorts derisively.
I'm not paying your petty protection racket money. You don't have the authority.
But Lopez is unmoved.
I work for Seafleur Industries, Mr. Stones. Aggressive corporate monopolies like ours own this ocean.
Back in our more sustainable future, Jakob offers Lara and Lopez ragged cushions to sit on as he prepares them cups of herbal tea.
I wish I could help you, Lara, but this is my life now. A little more humble than my Reverie days, yes, but I'm grateful to be able to help where I can. I've been living alone on this barge for the last 8 years, looking for healthy coral amidst the damaged reef.
What do you do when you find some?
Well, I take genes from healthy coral and transcribe them into their less resilient colleagues. In the long run, I'm afraid it's too late to save the reef, but I hope that I can slow down its destruction and buy the fish some more time to adapt.
You really became a better person in the last 8 years, Jakob.
We each do what we can, don't we?
Lopez cuts in.
We don't have time for this. I'm shutting down this operation effective immediately.
Jakob is shocked.
No, please. I'm doing this to atone for my corporate sins. I doomed the world's oceans, and now I'm trying to make it right.
But Lopez is unmoved.
Sorry, Mr. Stones, but you're using unregulated gene editing tools on an unregistered vessel in a heritage-listed marine park.
In both versions of the future, Lara has an idea. Lopez, wait. Jakob, tell us how to get around the Reverie security system, and we'll leave you alone.
You don't have that authority, Lara.
I don't need your clearance, Lopez. Now come on, Jakob. Help me help you. In the business-as-usual future, Jakob thinks for a long moment, then sighs.
As you know, Seafleur Industries built the Reverie in 2022, primarily as a deep ocean natural gas drilling platform, despite warnings from climate activists. But then gas prices tumbled, so they diversified into other industries, aquaculture and tourism. The outer rim of the Reverie is now a series of vast monoculture sea bream farms, and the control center in the middle has been turned into a high-stakes casino for the super wealthy.
Dirty money from dirty industries.
Oh, spare me your moralistic pandering, Lara. The security perimeter around the Reverie is airtight. I should know. I designed it myself. That bream farm is your only way in.
In the more sustainable future, Jakob thinks for a long moment, then sighs.
Well, as you know, Seafleur Industries built the Reverie in 2022, primarily as a deep ocean natural gas drilling platform. After warnings from climate activists, Seafleur ceased its gas production and retrofitted the facility to harness ocean thermal energy instead. They also diversified into aquaculture and tourism. The outer rim of the Reverie is now a vast rewilded coral reef built on platforms suspended 10 meters beneath sea level. And the control center in the middle has been turned into an ecotourism animal sanctuary for wealthy green vacationers.
Well, my hat goes off to Seafleur Industries. That all sounds like a responsible and sustainable vision for the future of the oceans.
Yes, indeed. Seafleur Industries is truly transforming the world's oceans, one megastructure at a time. Nevertheless, the security perimeter around the Reverie is airtight. That rewilded coral reef is your only way in.
In both versions of this story, Jakob hands over the blueprint to the modified Reverie facility, a rumbling sound overhead.
It looks as though a storm is coming. Good luck.
Thanks, Jakob.
Oh, and Lara, be careful.
So in this performance, we're looking at the future through the lens of two scenarios, business as usual and more sustainable. Neither scenario is all good or all bad, and we've exaggerated some of the differences between them, but one scenario is certainly preferable to the other. Now, neither of these futures is set in stone. If we want to get to the business as usual scenario, we don't really have to change anything. We're already on track for that future. But if we wanted to get to the more sustainable future, that will take work.
The researchers in the Future Seas project have identified 5 key areas that we need to address in order to change the path that we're on, and some critical actions that we can take to improve ocean health.
The first area is ecosystem health. This relates to how resilient and biodiverse marine ecosystems are. Are we protecting wild species and providing effective marine protection for their recovery?
The second area is climate resilience. The idea here is that our homes, our communities, and the systems we rely on have been adapted to address climate risk. Have we retrofitted our buildings and ocean infrastructure to be able to withstand increasing climate impacts?
The third area is community development. The argument here is that for a more sustainable ocean, we need communities to have a greater say in the management of their coastal resources. One example is a project in Chile, which handed over management of an ocean area to the fishermen who fished there. It's now up to those fishermen to ensure the well-being of this ecosystem, rather than politicians who have no connection to the area.
The fourth area is our food systems. We need to recognize that there's a fine balance to be struck between taking care of the environment and making sure that everyone is fed. With that trade-off in mind, we can improve the impact of our food production systems. For example, we could develop certification schemes so that we can label our fish as sustainably caught or not.
And finally, our connectedness to the oceans is critical. We need education and awareness-raising programs to help people improve their ocean literacy. But those programs should be two-way. Rather than just experts talking to communities, they should be conversations, with the communities sharing their own knowledge about their systems.
Shifting the dial on all of these elements is not a small challenge. These are big demands, and they involve a significant restructuring of our existing systems. We're going to leave it to you to discuss how this shift might take place once you finish this presentation. For now, let's see what happens to our heroes in the high-stakes finale of our hijacking drama.
Enormous thunderheads crackle with lightning as the fleet of seafloor Black Hawk choppers approach the Reverie, 500 kilometers off the coast of Geraldton.
Enormous thunderheads crackle with lightning as the fleet of IOP dinghies crest an angry wave on approach to the Reverie, 500 kilometers off the coast of Geraldton.
One of the pilots shouts to Lopez over the sound of gale force winds. "It's too rough out here. I can't get any closer." Lopez looks to Lara.
"Then you and me are going in alone."
No, wait.
But before Lara can argue, Lopez has grabbed her and leapt into the ocean water. Splash! Lara and Lopez sink to the murky depths of the ocean. Lopez straps a handheld rebreather to Lara's face and points to the giant underbelly of the Reverie. That's their way in.
Swimming beneath the Reverie's outer perimeter, Lara and Lopez navigate a web of steel umbilicals and subsea gas wells, siphoning natural gas into the facility. They strain against the deep sea current, squinting in the dark. A cluster of enormous columns appears ahead of them in the gloom. Coming close, they discover dozens and dozens of huge cylindrical nets, each 100 meters tall, extending to the surface.
Lara and Lopez scale the netted wall of one of the columns. Inside, the water roils and bubbles with thousands of genetically modified and nutrient-balanced captive-bred bream.
Finally, they surface in the middle of the Reverie's industrial monoculture bream farm, gasping for air. A networked sprinkler system up above delivers a steady cloud of nebulized antibiotics to ward off parasitic infections in the stock.
God, what's that smell?
Well, the fish here rely on diesel-powered oxygenators. You also just swam up through a veritable cloud of fish feces.
I need to get out of here. Where to next?
Once we're past the energy hub, there's a ventilation system that should lead us directly to the control center. Follow me.
They swim to the water's edge and hold themselves up onto one of the Reverie's enormous above-water platforms. No one around. So far, so good.
In the more sustainable future, Lara and Lopez swim beneath the Reverie's outer perimeter through a forest of steel columns, siphoning cold water up from the ocean floor.
They strain against the deep-sea current, squinting in the dark. A cluster of enormous platforms appears ahead of them in the gloom. Coming close, they discover a huge stretch of vivid, thriving, artificial coral reef. A cornucopia of rewilded aquatic life. Clownfish and humphead wrasses gliding through fields of elkhorn coral.
Lara and Lopez ascend through a school of friendly surgeonfish, finally surfacing in the middle of one of the Reverie's wave pools, gasping for air. A networked sprinkler system up above delivers a steady cloud of nebulized nutrients and pH balances to the reef below.
Oh God, something just brushed past my foot.
Carpet shark. Don't worry, they're harmless. A sign of a healthy coral reef, which is a marvel in this era of ocean acidification.
I need to get out of here. Where to next?
Once we're past the energy hub, there's a ventilation system that should lead us directly to the control center. Follow me.
They swim to the water's edge, haul themselves up onto one of the Reverie's enormous above-water platforms. No one around. So far, so good.
Back in the business-as-usual future, Lara leads Lopez along the edge of a massive loading bay. Automated cryogenic loading arms pack pallets of liquid natural gas modules into condensate storage containers, ready for offloading to smaller freight ships. It's just like it was the day I left. I can't believe they never pivoted away from this. I thought the writing was on the wall, but it seems like corporate lobbying and bureaucratic inertia paralyzed the transition to renewable energy over the 2020s.
Well, in the more sustainable future, Lara leads Lopez along the edge of a massive battery storage facility. Nearby, a glistening turbine purrs, harvesting the energy of the temperature differential in the seawater underneath.
This was all liquid natural gas back in the day. I never thought they'd pivot so quickly, but I guess the writing was on the wall. It seems that innovative tech companies and proactive policymakers drove a rapid shift to renewable energy this last decade. At that moment, gunshots ring out from the gantry up above. A squad of masked hijackers descend on Lara and Lopez.
I'll hold them off. You get to the control center.
Lopez!
Just go!
Lopez stands her ground and returns fire, a manic glint in her eye. Lara disappears into an air vent, navigating the Reverie's complex ventilation system. Minutes pass, feeling like hours. Lopez's gunfire grows faint in the distance.
Then, just as Lara starts to worry that she's completely lost, she looks down through a grate and recognizes the control center. A lone hijacker standing guard below.
All alone, huh? I guess the others went to fight Lopez. God, I hope Jesse's...
Crash!
The air vent gives way and Lara falls, landing in a heap on what used to be the communications hub, now converted into a high rollers poker table, still dotted with stacks of $50,000 gaming plaques and gambling chips from an interrupted game. The lone hijacker turns to her, clutching an AK-47.
Splash! The air vent gives way and Lara falls, landing on what used to be the communications hub, now converted into a starfish touching pool, a slushy grotto of sea cucumbers and soft anemone, surrounded by information plaques for young eco-tourists.
The lone hijacker turns to Lara, clutching an AK-47.
Hello, mother.
The lone hijacker is none other than Jesse Nguyen, Lara's estranged daughter. Jesse. As soon as I heard what happened, I was worried it might be you.
Well, sorry to disappoint you again, Mum.
You're in serious trouble, Jesse. I got you a job here on the Reverie so you could safeguard my legacy, so you could make a difference to the world. What do you think you're doing?
I never wanted to work on this stupid multi-use offshore facility. I just wanted to be close to you. You loved deepwater ocean infrastructure more than you loved your own daughter. I came here to spend time with you, and then you just left me here. I don't know how to run a large-scale floating natural gas facility / ocean thermal energy converter / high-stakes international waters casino / ecotourism destination hotel / industrial monoculture bream farm / rewilded carpet shark sanctuary. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. Seafloor Industries has been hemorrhaging money ever since you left. This was the only choice I had. Fake a hijacking and sell the Reverie off to the highest international bidder.
I thought the best thing for you would be for me to leave you alone, so you could finally become your own person.
I never wanted to be your protege. I just wanted to be your daughter.
Jesse, I'm so sorry.
Jessie drops her AK-47 and rushes towards Lara, and they embrace.
But at that moment, Lopez bursts into the control room, alive but rattled, keeping pressure on a bullet wound in her shoulder.
I took care of the other hijackers. I can see you're taking care of this one. With hugs. Lopez unfolds a pair of handcuffs, but Lara steps towards her, shielding her daughter.
Listen to me, Lopez. I know you've got a job to do, and I know you like to do things by the book. But whatever you're about to do to Jessie, do it to me instead. I'll accept her punishment in her place. I was the chief architect of this multi-use offshore ocean facility and chief architect of my daughter's misery. Lopez cracks a smile.
I've spent my whole life playing it by the rules, but it's 2030. And if we keep doing things the way we always have, how's anything ever going to change? And with that, she tosses the handcuffs aside.
Outside, in business as usual, the storm has passed. Lara, Jesse, and Lopez speed away from the Reverie in a lifeboat. Up above, the fleet of Seafloor Black Hawk helicopters fly the remaining hostages to safety.
Here's how it's going to work, Jesse. We're going to tell my bosses that you went down with the Reverie. You get a new name, a new identity, a brand new start. All you have to do is push this button. And she hands Jesse a remote detonator.
You're going to blow it up?
Between you and me, this is what Seafloor Industries wanted all along. They're transitioning away from gas, and the insurance money from the Reverie would buy them a nice chunk of the Amazon rainforest to turn into timber for the Chinese housing market.
They laugh heartily. Jesse pushes the button, and the Reverie multi-use deep water ocean facility explodes in a brilliant burst of blue flame. 1 million sickly farm-bred bream goes scattering into the ocean beyond, and the clouds up above part to reveal a brilliant blue sky.
Well, in the more sustainable future, the storm has passed. Lara, Jesse, and Lopez speed away from the Reverie on a lifeboat.
Up ahead, the fleet of IOP solar-powered dinghies take the remaining hostages to safety.
Here's how it's going to work, Jesse. The IOP have eyes and ears all over the world. I reckon I can hide your footprints for a while and get you a head start, but after that, you're on your own. Lara thinks and then says,
I know somewhere you'll be safe. A few hours later, Lara bids her daughter farewell, yet again, leaving her in the safekeeping of Jakob Stones on his scientific barge in the Ashmore Reef.
Mum, will you come to visit me?
I'll try, Jesse. I'll try.
And with that, Jesse watches her mother disappear beyond the waves.
In one version of the future, Lara returns to her small Tasmanian fishing village where the waves splash up against cheap concrete barriers. Seagulls float overhead looking for food through the teeming clouds of jellyfish.
She guides a group of tourists from Perth along the water's edge, while Jesse contentedly measures the microplastic content of their catch. Mother and daughter, together again at last.
And another version of the future, Lara returns to her small Tasmanian fishing village, where the waves splash up against thick trees and sturdy vegetation.
She demonstrates some onshore fishing techniques to a group of young apprentices who look up at her, hungry for knowledge, grateful for her insight, ready to learn, wide-eyed and hopeful for the future. Brand new proteges. Lara only wishes that Jesse could be one of them.
And in both versions of the future, the tide comes in, the tide goes out, and the future remains unwritten.